The idea is to present the first general recommendation of the Council of Europe of the Convention on Preventing Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which is the first general recommendation that we as GREVIO produced almost 2 years ago. Probably some of you don't have any clue what GREVIO is. GREVIO is a committee of experts established from the Council of Europe in order to monitor the countries that are state parties to the Istanbul Convention. So what we do is that for the 37 countries with the UK that ratified lastly, we monitor the 4 pillars of the convention and also draw a recommendation with the state parties to follow. So far, we have done like 27 reports on various countries, and we are hoping that till the end of 2023, we will finish with all the baseline evaluation of the countries on respecting Istanbul Convention. The growing accessibility of the internet and the wide use of the ICTs has created enormous opportunities for so many of us. It has helped us to connect, to get through the COVID-19 pandemic, but we all know that there are downsides to the internet too. One of them is the growing volume of violence against women that is perpetrated online or through technology. So that's why we as GREVIO couldn't ignore the fact that the internet use grows, and so does the violence against women. The increasing needs to address all forms of online and tech-facilitated violence against women became even stronger recently. And internet usage exponentially increased during the lockdown. Online and technology-facilitated violence has spread under the shadow pandemic of violence against women and girls. Unsolicited pornographic videos were displayed during social and online events. We have heard of Zoom bombings and threats of sexualized violence, and harmful sexist content increased. Similarly, in France, doxing-related sexual abuse has multiplied with the production of new type of Snapchat or Telegram accounts, posting young women, sometimes underage, nudes, revealing their body and identity and contact information, directing mobs of sexual abusers at them in their local community. It is important to highlight that violence we are discussing is only the continuum of the offline violence. The physical and psychological violence against women that takes offline every day on the streets, at home, or at work is widely amplified, spread and worsened in the online world and by the new technologies. The root causes are exactly the same: gender inequality, harmful gender stereotypes, in particular stereotypes around male and female sexuality, misogyny, and the notion of women's inferiority to men. The nature and the extent of the problem reveals that much more needs to be done to address it by preventing it from happening, by protecting and supporting victims who experience it, and by holding perpetrators accountable. And this is where the Istanbul Convention offers huge potential. So for this reason, almost 2 years ago, we as GREVIO set out our journey to provide guidance to state parties of the Istanbul Convention to respond to the digital dimension of violence against women, taking the convention as its foundation and basis. Last year, in November, we signed a very important step in this journey as we published our very first general recommendation, and I'm extremely happy to present the result of our deliberation and consultations. The Istanbul Convention is far more reaching legally binding instrument to prevent and combat all forms of violence against women. It does not contain specific provision on the digital perpetration of violence against women, but its very definition on violence against women cover all acts of gender-based violence that result in or are likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological or economical harm or suffering to women, including threats such as acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty. All acts of such violence means whenever they are perpetrated. Also, the Convention specifically requires the criminalization of forms of violence such as psychological violence, Article 34, stalking, the Article 33, and sexual harassment, Article 40. The explanatory report of the Convention says very clearly that, in particular, stalking may include behavior on social media and in the virtual world more generally. So that's why our general recommendation, therefore, looks very closely at the behavior to be criminalized or otherwise sanctioned under three types of offenses. It offers, in relation to each of them, detailed examples of online and tech-facilitated behavior that comes into their remit. I'll start with the Article 33, psychological violence, which is of fundamental importance to our discussion here today. All forms of online and technology-facilitated violence impact psychologically all the victims, so they could come, therefore, under this definition. But another dimension of psychological violence that is exerted by the perpetrators in the context of domestic violence. Perpetrators of intimate partner violence use electronic devices and other technology in order to control and manipulate, psychologically abuse their victims. This is part of the abuse during the relationship, and we have noted during our work that it usually continues after separation. Stalkerware, tracking devices, smart toys for children, or living in a smart home gives abusive partners or ex-partners ample opportunity for psychological abuse or to invoke fear or to locate the victim. Specialist support services for domestic violence victims are spending more and more time and energy on counseling on that aspect of the abuse. This includes offering technical support to disable spyware or GPS tracker from their clients' devices and to collect evidence for criminal complaints. Very often, this is time and energy that they do not have because of the chronic underfunding of the services and the ever-changing tactics of domestic abusers. What it is important to note is that in many countries, expertise among law enforcement agencies around this aspect of intimate partner violence is only slowly building up. A recent judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, Buturuga versus Romania, drew attention to this issue. Stalking, as covered by the Article 34 of the Convention, may include its online dimension spying on or contacting the victim on various social media profiles, stealing their passwords, hacking their devices to gain access to their accounts, installing spyware or geolocalization apps on their devices, or simply stealing them. A relatively newer form of violence is the monitoring and the control of the victim via technological devices connected through the Internet of Things, such as smart home appliances. This is of particular relevance in the context of intimate partner violence, but also post-separation abuse, and gives these types of violence a chilling dimension with obvious consequences on the safety of the victim. Last but not least, sexual harassment online constitutes one of the most prevalent forms of violence against women in the digital sphere and includes a wide range of online behavior, such as any image-based sexual abuse, creep shots and upskirting, deepfakes, forced sexting, sextortion, rape threats, and sexualized bullying. Many women and girls, including very young girls, are exposed to these forms of behavior, and for many, this has far-reaching consequences for their personal and professional lives, doing a great harm to them. Seeing how much of this online behavior actually comes within the remit of existing definitions of criminal behavior of the Istanbul Convention, our general recommendation proposes action following the holistic approach of the Convention, covering all four pillars. In the area of the prevention, it stresses education and the training of professionals, but also need to tackle the root causes, such as challenging stereotypes and harmful gender roles. This means enhancing digital literacy within our society, but especially among women and girls through education. This means providing mandatory and continuous capacity building and training to all relevant professionals in the law enforcement, judiciary, healthcare, asylum system, social services, and education on digital expression of violence against women. This means developing awareness-raising campaigns targeting women and men, girls and boys on the digital dimension of violence against women. Education efforts regarding digital forms of violence against women. And last but not least, media has an undeniable role in shaping public perception on gender roles in society. The general recommendation encourages the state party to incentivize media organization and journalist unions to abandon victim-blaming attitudes and violations of the privacy of victims and their children in all their journalistic activities. I'm a journalist and I teach at the Department of Journalism for 25 years, and I can only emphasize how important this is. In the area of the protection, I have mentioned that the digital dimension of violence against women had been taking a toll on the already limited human and financial resources of especially support services. So yet the Istanbul Convention requires their accessibility and availability across the countries. That's why the general recommendation calls on state parties to develop and disseminate information on legal avenues and support services available to victims of digital violence and create easily accessible complaints mechanism within law enforcement. The general recommendation also addresses the roles of one of the main non-state actors in the area, internet intermediaries such as the ISPs, search engines, and social media platforms. States should encourage these sectors to establish mechanisms to provide robust moderation of the content that goes against the principles of the convention through removal of content or the account. Information on how to utilize this mechanism must be clear and easily accessible to victims as well. In the final area of the prosecution, we have identified the need to increase the capacity. The general recommendation also proposes that state parties equip their law enforcement officers and other criminal justice actors with the necessary human, financial, and technical resources to effectively investigate and prosecute digital forms of violence. More often than not, violence against women committed in the digital sphere can be located and has an international character, can be located anywhere in the world, as well as the private enterprises that store information on the perpetrators or the violent content. The general recommendation thus promotes enhanced international cooperation and mutual legal assistance to ensure simplified access to evidence held by service providers, such as subscriber information or the IP address used by perpetrator. The Istanbul Convention requires a holistic response taken together as a comprehensive set of policies. The measure I presented can tackle the issue of cyber violence in all its aspects. That's why the general recommendation promotes cooperation with the private sector, the media, and civil society. Our recommendation shows state parties ways how to include the companies, software designers, IT professionals, and of course, platforms to be an integral part of the solution. Given the increase in online sexual violence, such as filmed rape, commercial entities must be prevented from making profits out of this disturbing practice, including by criminalizing the production and distribution of such content when necessary. This and other more detailed proposal can be found in our general recommendation. It is an absolute honor for me to present this very first interpretation of the Istanbul Convention by GREVIO today with you. As a member of GREVIO since the day one, now serving as the president, I have seen this group of experts and the work on the Istanbul Convention steadily progress. I'm hopeful that the guidance that we have published on how to apply this important treaty to the vast digital dimension of violence against women and girls will provide to your organization and policymakers, legislators, government authorities, and many, many others with impetus to act. Thank you.